Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Joe and Shari, thanks for being here today. I've had the privilege of getting to work with you both here at Reverb and elsewhere. So it's so great to get the gang together to talk about this topic of pay transparency. Our format today is going to be really informal. We don't have a slide deck or presentation. We just have some kind of sort of thought out questions that I thought would be maybe good to dive into, but we really want to hear from the group. And understanding that on the call today, we've got folks that are in HR, we've got business, people from the business community. So we just want to make it a really rich, helpful discussion to hopefully maybe dig into some more areas or just places where people are just curious about where this is going, what we've seen, kind of how we're experiencing this change in our state and lots of other states. So I thought it'd be good to just maybe start at the baseline of just the basics of what the law brought about when it went go live on January 1. So in Washington, it's any employer with 15 or more, and please, either of you, if I say something incompletely or don't have the full meal deal, please call me out. But 15 employees plus, you need to clearly state on a job posting what the salary range is for any job, and that includes total benefits and any other associated pay. Correct?
Yes.
Right. So line that out, and I am looking at the legislation. I mean, it's pretty basic wording. So and then even this includes remote folks. So if you're based in Washington, but you're hiring people in Alaska or Oregon, you need to talk about the salary range. And you can't disclude, is that right? Can you say we're not hiring remote?
Well,
or you can,
not super clear, but I wouldn't.
It really depends. It depends on where the location of the job is, but if it can be performed in Washington, you need to show the range. But if you're hiring for a specific location in Texas and you're based here, then that's a different story. But that's where it has to be. If it can be performed here in Washington, it needs to have a range.
Gotcha. Thank you. So who's impacted by it is any employee. So that includes, or any position that's posted, correct? So is there any job that a company would post that wouldn't be included, like an internship or a contractor or part-time or seasonal, or is everybody included?
It depends. I mean, that's where, if you're saying we're hiring servers, but once then you don't, but once you get into it and you say, if you're showing a job posting, it's saying experience and all that, that's where it crosses the line. When you're saying getting into specifics of what you're looking for in the actual job, that's when the range comes in.
Okay, thank you.
The best thing is really to just assume, in my opinion anyway, to assume that the pay range is needed. It calls out very specifically in some of the helpful documents, quote unquote, that they brought out in the fall, that any of these exceptions should be very, very carefully used and not used very often. So to me, it's like, do whatever you can to figure out a pay range.
I think that's a great, the bottom line, right? Is just assume. And I think that's really good advice, Shari, to just, in any doubt, if you have any doubt, just go ahead and put it out there. Right. So that's great. Thank you. And I think we're up to 8 states now that have pay transparency laws. So I think it's going to become much more the norm. And with the remote and hybrid work world, it just seems like the smart way to go. So.
And there's so many different things that are overlapping. When people say pay transparency, there are things where, there's laws in place where you can't ask a candidate what their past pay was in another job. That's kind of lumped under pay transparency too. So it's not, excuse me, it's not all pay ranges. So keep that in mind too. There's all these other little intricate details that come under pay transparency, but I think ranges, especially in Washington state, are really being focused on right now. But in all these other states, there's other things that are part of that law too, and in Washington.
Yeah, it's interesting. So one thing I was thinking about, and just a question to toss out there, and I'd really encourage anyone with any thought, comment, question that you have, feel free to post in the chat, and we'll get to that as kind of they come in, instead of like waiting till the end. So we want this to be an organic kind of free flowing discussion, but we had some questions to kind of get things going. But what have you been observing and or seeing community now that this is out there and live, and how have you seen, you know, clients and companies respond? What are some things you're seeing?
I can go ahead and start. I don't want to just run over everybody.
Right.
So that, like, I see kind of three different buckets. So I see the panic people, where they're like, oh my gosh, and they're just trying almost anything, throwing darts at the wall to just get pay ranges posted without thinking that they have time to literally do a little bit of work. Now, granted, we're past January 1st, so I get that. But I think that people think it's going to take such an amazing amount of work that they don't even want to get started. They just want to kind of go with some general, really wide pay ranges, for example. So that's one way that I see them. Another way is almost the opposite, where they're like, we're going to be very, very, very precise, but maybe they don't have the support or the team to create precise ranges. And they're not thinking, like, have we even defined our jobs correctly yet? So I see those two. And then I see like the let's not think about it or worry about it and just ignore it. We'll try to get around it. We saw that a lot with the Colorado law, where you saw so many people say, hey, this job is available except in Colorado. So those are the three big buckets that I see. I think Colorado kind of close that other one down, although I see people trying it now, but it's not as prevalent as it was when Colorado rolled out.
Joe, how about you? What do you?
Roughly about the same thing. There was a lot of questions of, okay, you know, when people were going into it, you know, prior to, late 2022, okay, what does this mean? And how are we going to, defining a range? What's the range? Well, the range is the range. It's not really something you can mess around with. And then they were going down what, Shari just said. What if we just do a wild, big range? And they're like, yeah, that's not going to fly. And so what happened is people were evolving towards what's the minimum level to be compliant, and what's that level? And the fact is that just this is an opportunity really to define, who you are and what you are. So talk about the range. This is the ranges. This is what we pay for this role. That's what's really getting interesting is, everybody was kind of going, with multiple questions on it, but we all fell in the same place. And that's really is the purpose of this, is getting into, what, 3 years ago, or 2018, when this first thing started getting talked about, it was pay equity. And that's really what the purpose of this is. So it really is do the right thing and just, post the range. And this is an opportunity for companies to really to tell their story, because it's about pay and who you are and how you take care of your employees. And that's the path to go down, instead of just being minimally compliant.
Yeah. It seems like you can really take this as an opportunity to make yourself like really competitive and really share kind of all the things that you believe and offer, and just that value proposition for candidates, and also taking care of your internal people. So you mentioned something about the reviewing and sort of getting ready for this, and the kind of the behind the scenes work. So are you seeing more care and feeding of like the process and setting up a rhythm to that, and an auditing and just sort of a regular review? Is that something that around the equity piece, does that seem to be happening more?
I think that's where, smaller companies are really getting into what's that process. That's the calendar. I come from larger companies where you have that calendar. It's the compensation calendar is the same, at a lot of companies. You got your survey season, then in the fall, you get your numbers back, you start creating your salary structures, and then you work with finance and the budgets, and you do all those types of things to get ready for the new year. And that's what companies just need to do, is they start thinking about this and evaluating their jobs and job descriptions. and then posting the information, and then also, updating your intranet site with, the benefits that you offer. And that's why I touched on, great benefits. Here's what we do to take care of our employees, and build that story out on your website, of who you are.
Yeah, and one thing, just because I've been working with a lot of smaller clients, so this is all new to them. And they come to me with what they think their story is. And we're kind of double checking that story, right? Like, we pay our employees competitively, or we're a startup and we pay our engineers amazing. We're at the top, and they've been recruiting like that. And all of a sudden they're like, well, maybe we do. So let's check on that. And what I've found is the most important thing well, I'm not even going to say in my opinion, the most important thing is data integrity, and data, like the cleanliness of your data. So what I mean by that, and that sounds very compy and people hate that, I know, but have you defined your jobs? So right now, let's say we're a bank and you have 80 tellers, but you have one job that is a teller. You have multiple levels of teller experience in there, and probably multiple levels of pay. So wouldn't you want to define some job levels and put people in those correct levels in order to start looking at pay equity? So at the smaller companies, what I see is the need and want to define those jobs and levels and get people placed correctly before they do a pay analysis that is now going to be a little bit more accurate. And then that is the data integrity piece. Are our people leveled? Are they in the right job? Do we understand where they should be? Are they there? And now let's look at their pay.
And are they usually like completely overwhelmed? Like when you start talking about that, I'm thinking about the small, small businesses, folks that maybe just like you said, haven't really thought about how to extend the opportunities for career pathing, and just like, oh yeah, we should be paying someone who's done this for 5 years or 10 years or has this particular competency, but like, what are they like, okay, I can, like, how much time or
right? No, that's immediately their first concern. And nobody wants to write a whole bunch of job descriptions, right? So typically what I do, and this is, probably very particular to me, but I have written so many job descriptions, or things that I call job family summaries or career development tracks, where you have, every job description for each level of teller lined up side by side with the descriptions of where they differ, right? I have done so many of those for so many different industries that I usually just have drafts, or am able to put together a draft very quickly. And then they're just editing that to create something that makes sense for their organization, or uses words that they use in their organization. So they're not creating a ton of this stuff. They're reacting and editing, and that's a much smaller time suck than writing everybody's job descriptions. So it's not as difficult usually as they expect.
And it sounds like it's one of those things that if you just spend the time initially, then it's just something you update and you kind of keep up with, and it maybe isn't so time consuming.
And then you have things for, like, I can post a job and I already have it written. I know, how it connects to market data. I know what the pay range is. I can use these things for career development, conversations and performance coaching. So it's not just, we're going to do this for pay transparency. We're going to do this to have an entire library of jobs and plans for compensation, performance management, organizational development, all of it.
Yeah, thank you. Just want to respond or point out the couple notes from Andrew and Amanda. So, the small organization, but have very specific pay ranges, which I think if you have specialty roles, that's probably, you're going to see that, correct, in like certain qualifications and experience levels. But there's a question about, what do you say to employers who want to pay above market, or they struggle to limit to the top of the range for certain high level or unique, hard to fill roles? Like, what's any advice there?
Well, I think that sounds like a compensation philosophy conversation. So before you even do market pricing, you really want to understand what the compensation philosophy of the company is. And a lot of people just gut react and say, we want to pay to the median of the market. That might not work for a startup with software engineers where they have to be super, super competitive and at the top of the market, for example. So what I would say is, let's talk about compensation philosophy specific to certain jobs. So the majority of your employees, maybe your compensation philosophy is the median of the market, but for very specific jobs, we might need to focus our software engineers at the 75th of a pre-IPO startup survey, for example, which is very different than the 75th of a general industry survey. So you start really kind of drilling down into what data are you looking at and at what level or percentile within that data. And that's all compensation philosophy before you really even get started on the benchmarking.
Yeah. I feel like you should have that tattoo about data or something, Shari.
Right. Oh, who's saying I don't?
Speaking of data, just any tips on where, like, if you don't have a huge budget and you can't go the route of like this really expensive surveys, like where would you recommend folks maybe try to take a look at getting some decent data to validate their pages, ideas, or suggestions?
Well, you can help. I mean, it really depends. So if you're not going to go out there and purchase, thousands of dollars like a Radford, for that's a super expensive survey, you can still get close to it. Here at Reverb, we can help get you pretty close, and we're going to get close to the bullseye. But it's really starting to define, like what Shari said, who's your market, who are you competing against, and what's the right market data to use? Because everybody can pull data, but getting data that you're comfortable with, that this is who you're competing for talent. That's the most important thing to do, is making sure that you're getting good data to measure against, and then building off that, along with do you want to lead the market, do you want to meet the market or lag, and then what's the right pay mix? I mean, there's lots of questions, and I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible, and then you're off and running.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, and also when you're looking at data sources, I find it really important to consider the source. So you have a lot of people trying to sell data right now. And if really you want to look at the methodology of the survey, if you're not seeing that methodology immediately on their website or in any of their documents, if you have to go find it or you can't find it, that's a red flag. So if it is employee sourced data, so think things like salary.com, PayScale even. I mean, PayScale has non-employee source data, but it's very specific. You have to ask for it. They like to throw the employee stuff in there. So, there's the general surveys that comp people are really familiar with. And in the Pacific Northwest, you can get a lot of great inexpensive surveys, like for anywhere from 800 to 4,000 from Milliman. They have a Milliman Puget Sound survey. There's a financial industry survey. There's some very specific surveys under Milliman. I also, for a kind of a general industry look, if you're just hiring out of general industry, for example, and you don't have like a very specific startup or tech look, ERI, or Economic Research Institute, is amazing. It has great data. It has a lot of good cuts. You can get different industry cuts, different revenue sizes. It's a really easy program to use. It's about 3,000. And then you go up from there, Culpeper, Radford, things like that.
That's helpful. And I know we're trying to focus it on like sort of the pay transparency, but just like thinking about getting to be compliant, and just if some people really want to make sure that their information's valid and just to feel good about it, like that's just nice to have that recommendation. Speaking of compliance, have you heard or seen any or had any like experience around just, are folks asking about that, and are they worried about being in compliance, or is it truly like, hey, if you're showing ranges and you're showing pay information for candidates, like you're good? I mean, any comments about that just around the compliance piece? or
I think it
people in-
depends on which state. So, I know we're mostly in Washington here, but it's all very different. California, for example, they are requiring a ton of reporting, EEO reporting, and then like race, gender, different reporting like that. That is a concerning compliance issue, but I'm not sure how many employers are thinking about that yet.
Yeah, that's interesting. I
Yeah,
didn't know that.
yeah. So compliance is weird. Also, a really big thing, and I'll stop talking, Joe, I'm sorry, but I get really excited about this stuff,
It's okay.
is the LSA salary threshold. So exempt level employees in Washington State. Let me look. I have to, you'd think I'd know this off the top of my head, but I always look it up. In Washington State, you cannot have an exempt level employee below, this is California,
52.
below, no, it's higher now.
Higher.
Yeah, it just moved up to 50 or
57,293.
Yeah, something like that. It was.
Oh, I'm sorry. For 2023, it's 65,478 for large businesses, 57,293 for small. And I can send this schedule out to people so we can provide that to them.
That's awesome.
You posted that on LinkedIn and it saved my biscuit.
Yeah. And here's another weird thing that people don't know about that. So obviously, if you're posting an exempt job, you cannot have the minimum of the range below that in Washington State. In California, the level is 64,480. So think of that as part of pay transparency, but also do an audit on your exempt level employees. And by 2028, people cannot be exempt in Washington State right now. It changes a bit, under $83,000. So what is that going to do if you have non-exempt people? Exempt people making less than $83,000? Think about what that's going to do. Will you need to put them in non-exempt? Will they need to start tracking time? You'll start to have to pay overtime. So huge implications.
So many just different things to have to get your arms around and your mind around. And I just want to make sure we get to these couple of comments and questions. So one, just about the California thing, mentioning that we are supposed to keep record of employee job description and salary for up to 3 years. Is that right? That record retention?
Yes.
And then, that's just a good practice to have.
And every title they've had and every job description they've had in that period of time.
Wow. Okay. And then just to touch on tips for managers about how to talk about cost of living versus cost of labor when we're talking about like the nitty gritty.
Joe, do you want to take it? Because I could go on forever on that.
Yeah, this is, cost of living versus cost of wages, and everybody's talking about that. And there's usually a correlation between the two. But the fact is that it's about cost of wages, and that's what the surveys are about. And because I have this conversation with a lot of clients, and it's been going on with many employees, that the cost of living is going on. And I get that. I understand that. And that's usually, there is a correlation because wages will, drive up, based upon the area of the country. But the fact is this is cost of wages that we're talking about. And that's what the surveys will give us. And we need to be competitive with that. If you turn a blind eye to that, it can happen where, and I always give out that in Hawaii, I've had companies that pay crazy high wages when they didn't have to because of the cost of living out there. And the fact is they could get somebody at $20 an hour when they were paying 40. And that's what the surveys said. I'm not saying that's right, but I'm saying it gets back into what Shari talked about at the beginning. What's your comp philosophy? What you want to do? Yeah. There's a purpose and so that's where I say there's a correlation. Don't turn a blind eye to cost of living. You want to take care of your employees, but you need to make an informed decision and not let cost of living drive everything that's going on in your pay practices.
It's a data point, especially if you've got high remote employees working in New York City versus more rural areas or not as large of
area. Well, now you're getting into geographic differentials.
I know.
That's a super hot topic we could talk on all day too. So.
Yeah.
Well, and the interesting thing, if you think about cost of living versus cost of labor, in certain areas, people, whether they mean to or not, are giving up some money to live there. Like, think of it that way. So I just pulled some data from ERI. They have a really amazing geographic assessor that I use for this. For a $100,000 job, just a general $100,000 job in Seattle, let's see, the cost of living in Seattle, if compared to national average, is 145% for Seattle. So it costs 45% more to live in Seattle than it does at the US average. But the cost of labor is 116%. So you're making a little bit more to live in Seattle, but your cost of living is significantly more impactful. Now, that is what employees are feeling. It's real, but the cost of labor number is the number that employers can pay to get that level of skill. And that is not a wonderful thing to say to an employee, but it's a very important thing to understand, as a manager at least. So that is why the feeling is so gross when you're looking at like the cost of living versus cost of labor. People are giving up money in order to live in places like Seattle and San Francisco, whether they want to or not. You know, we're seeing a lot of people move now, especially after the you know, everybody going to remote work and things like that. Yeah.
Great adjustments from that. Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, thanks for diving into that. I mean, it sounds like that's just like some of the consequences of just like doing that deep dive and really trying to understand all the information. But any other things, I guess, or any other predictions? Just curious, not that there's anything baking in the legislation, I don't think so, but anything additional that you think might start to see as a trend or as something that might be the next thing that comes around pay transparency, or any thoughts there or interesting projections?
So I think they're going to start getting better at defining the laws around pay transparency. There's definitely some issues with current laws, and they vary so much by state. I do not see that changing. So it's going to get harder and harder to track that. So it's not going away, especially if you're in multiple states. They're going to be cleaning up some of the current issues. One that I see in Washington is pretty significant. If you have like part-time exempt employees, and this falls into that, not necessarily pay transparency, but the FLSA thing, but it also ends up on the same thing. If you have like a $100,000 job and somebody's working 20 hours a week and they're making $50,000 a year, that threshold number that Washington State will accept is the 50,000. So to meet that exemption threshold, you actually would have to give that employee a raise, make them work more hours, or make them be non-exempt. And so, you know, there's a lot of these weird little parts of the law that don't make sense, and they're going to be cleaning those up. And so I think you just have to manage the risk of how much do we really want to attack this to fit exactly right, or do we wait and manage that risk and let these things kind of work themselves out?
Yeah. Fascinating. Anything from you, Joe? Anything you think that might be kind of either get more focus on, or like anything about reporting, or just I'm curious about the auditing part.
I think auditing is probably going to be it, where pay equity is really going to get to be a hotter topic as people are doing that. The one thing that's always been a challenge is, you know, keeping everybody equitably paid, because eventually what happens is you bring in people and they fall into the system, and your merit matrix drives a lot of your pay practices and promotions, and you tend to lose a blind eye to everybody internally, and you're always focused on the external market and bringing in talent. I just want to make sure that everybody's pay equity and everybody's getting paid equitably, and keeping that in track, as you know, Shari talked about. it's getting to be those EEO and those reporting structures are coming in. You need to make sure you keep that as an annual practice as you're reviewing your compensation program.
Yeah. Yeah, and it seems like at some points that sometimes the market drives such a much larger percent increase for jobs than what an internal practices around merit or like whatever budget they have. So it seems like that compression happens so
Compression will happen.
quickly in a lot of places. So it's like hopefully that, I mean, yes, hopefully that this changes that, right?
Mhm.
That's the purpose of
That's the
this, is
purpose.
really is
Yeah.
you're piercing the veil a little bit, and it was uncomfortable posting the range, but and that's what people were uncomfortable with, because this was a very confidential thing, and now all of a sudden you're saying, holy cow, we're a little bit more exposed, but everybody is doing it. So now you're getting a little bit, now everybody's starting to get a little bit more comfortable with it, and now it's time to really start talking about pay. It's okay. And and this is why I said at the beginning, this is a time to tell your story of who you are, what you are, and pay is only one piece of the puzzle of, like you said, the value prop, the total rewards, your benefits programs. Who are you? And then build your program around who you are.
Yeah. Have you seen practices like thinking about from the employee perspective, like the folks who are already in-house or who've been working years or whatnot, like, and they have not had the view or access to ranges or to understand if they want a promotion, like what the next range is. I mean, are you seeing people phase into being more open around that or trying to get more comfortable with that?
I think it's a growing process. Shari talked about pay families. I think it depends on the life cycle of the company and where you're at. You don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole with a lot of this, but what's right for you and when it's right for you to introduce, families, subfamilies, leveling. That's a lot, to take in, but it also makes it simple for you as you administer your program.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, and you want to discuss too, like at the leadership level, like what do we really want to say and when and to who, right? So, do we want to tell people we're doing this project if we're doing one while we're doing it or after we do it? Or do we only want to tell managers? How much do we want to tell them about the project, how we did it? This transparency of communication is also a piece of this. And, it might not be, we go from never talking about pay transparency or having any pay transparency to full pay transparency in a year. But like, how are we going to think about in the next 3 to 5 years, how we mature our compensation programs, and how are we going to mature our communication along with that? The communication, you can do all the analysis that you want, which is what I love. And then you've got to also communicate what that means, not just to the executives to make a pay decision, but you're going to have to communicate to your candidates, your managers, potentially your employees, and you really need a plan for that.
Yeah. I mean, I love that. Just the thinking about how, the training piece in particular for managers or people just to feel confident and to like proactively talk to teams about it. But then also that this isn't just a one and done. Like you can't just say, okay, we're here, we posted our ranges, we're good. Like it is a longer term, longer horizon event and great opportunity for the team. So
one of my favorite questions to a new client is, tell me what your definition of a promotion is. And I almost always either don't get an answer or I get 5 different answers. And that tells me immediately that it's also really important to define your compensation pieces. What is an annual increase? What's a merit increase? Are they different? What's a promotion? When does a promotion need to be posted versus not? Like you can roll that all into this pay transparency project. Just define everything as you go along, and it will just serve you for years and years and years.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions, thoughts, just it's bring up for anybody as we kind of jump from a few different topics, but okay, hold on. Gail got a couple questions. So part of an agency and reaching out email ask for the job description. So the question is it required to send along the pay range of benefits, or do you just email them just the job description and then chat with them about it? That's a great clarifying question. So share it verbally. I think you have to share it in writing, but
I would share it in writing. I don't know if there's any law saying that you have to, but it's a good idea to share it in writing.
Yeah,
just
I mean,
err on the side of that.
Yep.
Yeah.
There
Does
was
that
a question above Gail's as well.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
They came in at the
Thanks.
same time. I just want to make sure you
Yeah.
saw them.
Yeah, of course. Thanks. So this is about enforcing the pay range transparency. Is it dependent on where the employer is based and that state's law?
it's where the
Depends
job's
on the
being,
posting. Yeah.
it's, that's where the employee is working. I mean, that's where the posting is. So even though, like,
Mhm.
say if it's Walmart, Walmart's here, based in Arkansas, but they've got places here, you got to post the job description
Mhm.
with the range.
So that's
And
a
if
good,
you're posting any job that like a remote job, you
Mhm.
kind of have to look across and figure out what is the most restrictive laws and follow that one. That's my opinion completely.
Yeah.
But if you might get a candidate from California, you might get a candidate from New York, you might get one from Washington. You need to make sure that you are covering all of those bases, which is what's going to get really hard about this.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's all about where the posting is located. And if it's like you're saying, Shari, if it's like a company that's fully remote, 100% remote, and they're agnostic about state, then it's like what you're saying is follow whatever the most requirements are. Like maybe that's California right now.
Yeah, look to California and Washington.
Washington as the two.
Yeah, and then if you're following those and you can check off the boxes there, you're fine.
You're good. Okay,
Mhm.
great. Anything that we just, oh wait, here's another question from Laura. Oh wait, we got a couple. Hold on one sec.
All right. We're getting having
Yeah,
fun
this
here.
is great. So this other question is around what you have to post related to bonuses and other parts of pay, not just salary. And then how specific do you need to be if you do need to post those? Like incentive pay, I don't know, commission pay,
all of that you have to post.
Anything, bonuses. Okay.
So
And
part of the problem is, right, like I think the people that create the legislation are like, oh, everybody has already pay ranges and they have things like bonus targets for every job. Now, if you have that, that's an easy thing to do. But a lot of companies do not have that. They do discretionary bonuses. They might change significantly year over year. That's going to be a lot harder. That is where you're going to have to take your best guess and create a range around that best guess. That is also a reason to maybe work on creating some sort of structure in this next year so that you can tie these things to, okay, these jobs have these ranges and we expect to pay these bonuses out at this amount. It's a problem. It's a big thing, and I understand the issues. Yeah.
And just different, and also just with a question here on top of that, just the fluctuating profit sharing. And can you put like a percent if you offer like a certain percent of profit sharing, or is it percent okay to share?
You can do percent, even for bonus. You can say, we offer a 10% base pay target bonus and a 5% profit sharing. Yes.
Yeah. And go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to ask, can you put in a range or does it have to be really specific? So if it ranges from 0 to 10%, for example,
you can put in a range.
Okay. Thank you.
This point. Yeah. Like people are going to be doing a lot of different things because it's so not defined. I would just try to make it so you have to think of two different things. You have to think of, is it true for my current population? And how will they react if they see a job that is similar? How does it compare to what I'm giving them? So it's pretty interesting, like sometimes an interesting thing to look at. And it also, has to be something like, if you're choosing to do ranges, is this something that's going to irritate or attract the candidate? If you do these huge ranges, the candidates can be like, I can go over here and find a better range and I know it's something that I actually want. This one, I have no idea. So I might just skip that.
The tangibility of understanding what that actual number could be. But I think with the question around the profit sharing, if you just define what the profit sharing is that acceptable? Like there may not be like a number or a percent to share, but it just might be like, we just offer
It's
this.
acceptable as of now, because there's no definitive, definition in the law.
Yeah, and we've got a couple questions here about salary expectations for candidates and ways of maybe getting around that, or if that's appropriate or not, but like asking folks what their salary expectations are. Is that different? That's different than asking them what their previous pay was. So
Correct. You can ask expectations.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think the question also includes like, do you have any brainstorming responses around like a positive response back from, if you're not wanting to maybe share because it shares your past history.
Just say competitive. I want to be competitive with the market, is what I've always and say, what's the range? I want to be competitive. I don't want to come in too high and do that. But if if I come in too low, I'm going to be pissed. So I mean, there's a sweet spot in there, and that's what you want. And that's the purpose of this, is to be competitive internally and externally of your market. Because if you come in low, you're going to get frustrated, and you're probably going to be wondering, you're going to turn right around and start looking, and that's not what they want. So,
and maybe
go
ahead.
I was going to say, as a compensation person, I can tell you how I always addressed that when I was interviewing, because and I think they kind of expect it from comp people, but I'd ask for the range, and then I would ask for any kind of bonus target, anything else. And basically I'm trying to get to like the total cash or the total offer. And then I usually say, well, until I can get more information, because a lot of times they don't have that information. I'm not going to give you a number until I can get a little bit more clear on the total cash position. Now, we don't have to do that back and forth as much as we're starting to have to post these things. But from a compensation perspective, it was always a laugh to me, because it was like, there is no way I'm going to give you one number right now. No way.
I mean, and that goes on because, like I said, this is only one piece. And if they come in low and they say the range is low, I'm going to ask, okay, well, what about the rest of it? Are benefits free? Is there no benefit employee premiums? Well, that factors into the total cash, the total rewards program. And like you said, Rebecca, the value prop. Well, what kind of development, growth, and opportunities are there?
Yeah. It's like, expand on sort of all the things that you might help support or pay or provide, for an employee. I just want to dig a little bit more on Zovig's comment. I think it's really important, just the negotiation piece, especially like a history of, women typically haven't, not to generalize, but like haven't been in terms of negotiating and just making sure, especially if you're, just impacted by pay inequity for decades, any other advice or just thoughts around how to make sure we're helping to support folks around that?
Well, I think, I think back to everything that has happened to me in my career. And I remember reading an article, it was probably 10 years ago, and it was describing like, why is there still pay inequity? Why are men getting paid more than women, et cetera, all the different things. And it dove into a few different things. One of them was between women and men. Typically, it talked about exactly how many times men would ask for a pay raise, either within the year or within 5 years. And it was almost once a year they would go to their manager and ask for a pay raise. And that blew my mind. And when I saw how often that women asked for a pay raise, which was hardly ever, you start understanding how these things, like, not only at offer do they happen, but as you're sitting in the seat. So I think like, as an employee or a coach of an employee, it's really important for us to recognize like personality, gender, race differences, and how, even age, for sure age, how we approach asking. And then as we start seeing more and more data out there and people have access to the internet, they can go do their own research. They're going to start, I think, asking even more. So making sure that if you have people that are asking a lot or repeatedly, at least once a year, and you have other people on your team that are not, that you are addressing that question for everyone, not just the ones that are asking.
Yeah, I love that.
That goes back to the pay equity analysis, because it shouldn't be when people ask. The fact is that you should take a close look at, and it's a multivariate, analysis on properly positioning people based upon their skills, what they bring to the role, and all that. And that will help keep, your pay lines intact.
Yeah, that's really helpful to think about. And it just kind of goes back to the initial sort of story of like, hey, get your house in order, look at what you're doing and make your plans and really lean in and establish your philosophy. Question about data on female managers and how if they are more conservative than their male counterparts when they do recommend, promotions or requesting pay increases during comp periods, for instance, like thinking about it from that perspective.
I don't know of any specific data. I'm sure there must be something out there. I would think that it is very, very employer specific on that. Even different industries, I've seen very different things. So I think understanding your managers, doing those pay equity analysis year over year over year will tell you a lot. It will get you your own data.
Yeah, I think it's more department specific, and the manager. I mean, I've seen engineers go in there and they go down to the finest, tenth and hundredth and thousandths of a percent on why we're giving this person. But then, you get the marketing person that just goes in there 3% across the board. Hey, I'm good to go. Hey, I'm done. And they're walking out the door and thinking they're doing a great job without going through it. So you need to hold people's feet to the fire to really put some thought into, how they're doing it, because they just don't want to have those hard conversations. And the fact is, you're a manager or, director, do your job. That's what you're there for. And if you don't, then compensation needs to come in and say, this is part of your role as this, of doing this job. Otherwise, you're going to have problems. And that's when pay equity becomes a problem.
Yeah.
Well, and one thing I think too that is so important is the more structure you add, the more structure people think there is, right? So be really, really careful that you don't just start using market data points as gospel and that you are only making your decisions to market data points. Market varies. Pay varies. You might have one data point, but there's a huge variety of pay within that range. So keep that in mind and don't lose that. Just know, like, I have guidelines built on these data points. We have established guidelines, but we also have to think about all of these varied things about people, performance, time in job, all of, education, whatever it is. And just make sure that as you're making decisions, you're making them using the same guidelines and the same thought process applied to everything. But don't tie everything to market data, because that's just as bad as any other approach. It's just one data point and it's a guideline.
Absolutely. Well said. Any other thoughts, questions, just anything, any prompts? One thing I was from the audience is, I know we're getting close to wrap up time here. And I just want to say, I think what we can follow up with some resources and links along with, if any, recording, so we can make sure you're well stacked with resources as you leave today. But any other last minute just thoughts or things you'd want to share that we haven't touched on, that you feel are any kind of cornerstones, or just anything else?
Don't panic. And I'm going to look through my notebook. So depending on, I'm trying to find, so somebody told me this, or said it in a meeting just yesterday, and I thought this is perfect. Perfection is the enemy of done. So don't think that you have to get this perfect. Just get started. Write down why you're doing things. Keep a track of why you're doing things. You can get better over time. You can make changes and dial things in over time, but do something now and get that ball rolling. It's not going to be perfect. It never will be. That's why compensation people are always busy, right? But don't let perfection stand in your way. Get something started now. It's important.
Yeah.
Or you're going to really fall behind.
Yeah, I love that. That's yeah, take a deep breath. It's not, you don't have to shut your doors and focus on this for the next year solely. I mean, it's just really good things to noodle on, good thing to build a strategy around, get some team members to help. It's because it will take just more than the comp team or more than the consultant you're working with. It is truly a group effort. So I really appreciate your wisdom and the detail, responses about things and all the things that we've been talking about. It's just really important. And I feel like we could do this once a week and we'd never get through everything.
Yeah.
All the questions and things that come up. So Kylie, Sarah, anything else you'd add as we